The crack of the rifle echoed through the dusty street of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, as the bullet hit its marked dead center on the distant tin can. Willow O'Connor lowered her Winchester, squinting against the late afternoon sun that bathed the desert landscape in golden light. It was 1878, and while the rest of the town's women were busy with their needlework and cooking, 22-year-old Willow had other priorities like being the best shot in the territory. "You hit it again, Miss O'Connor," young Billy Thompson said with undisguised awe, his freckled face beaming up at her. "Right in the middle," Willow smiled, her green eyes sparkling as she blew a stray auburn curl from her face. "Practice makes perfect, Billy. 5 years of shooting every day will do that." She tucked the rifle under her arm and headed back toward town, boots kicking up dust along the path. Billy scampered alongside her, asking a dozen questions about shooting techniques that she patiently answered. To the 10-year-old boy, Willow was something of a marvel, a proper lady who could outshoot most men. To the rest of Tonopah Junction, however, she was an oddity at best, a disgrace at worst. As they neared Main Street, the whispers began. They always did. "There she goes again with that rifle. Like she's some kind of man," Mrs. Abernathy muttered to Mrs. Peterson outside the general store. "Her poor father must be turning in his grave. No husband will ever want a woman who smells of gunpowder instead of perfume," Mrs. Peterson replied, loud enough for Willow to hear. Willow lifted her chin higher and kept walking. She'd heard it all before: how unladylike, how inappropriate, how no decent man would ever court a woman who carried a rifle instead of a parasol. 5 years of such talk had thickened her skin, but it couldn't completely dull the sting. "Don't listen to them, Miss O'Connor," Billy said, glaring at the gossiping women. "I never do, Billy," she replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. As they passed the saloon, several cowboys lounging outside straightened up, eyeing her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Well, if it ain't Annie Oakley herself," drawled Tom Mercer, a local ranch hand known for his mean streak. "Still playing with guns, O'Connor? Ain't you figured out yet that men don't want a wife who thinks she's a man?" His companions laughed, and Willow felt her cheeks flush despite herself. She kept walking, her grip tightening on the rifle. "That gun ain't gonna keep you warm at night," another called out, triggering more raucous laughter. Willow quickened her pace. "I'll see you tomorrow, Billy," she said, her voice tight. "Same time for shooting practice." "Yes, madam," Billy replied, casting one last glare at the cowboys before running off toward his home. Willow continued down the street toward her modest house at the edge of town. Her father had left it to her when he died 5 years ago, along with the rifle that had become her constant companion. James O'Connor had no sons, but he'd taught his only daughter to shoot as well as any man better, even. "In this country," he'd told her, "knowing how to defend yourself isn't optional, Willow girl, it's necessary." She'd taken those words to heart, especially after losing him to pneumonia when she was 17. Now the rifle was both protection and memory, a link to the father who'd believed a woman should be able to stand on her own 2 feet. Approaching her house, Willow noticed a wagon she didn't recognize parked out front. A tall man was unloading crates, his back to her. Probably a delivery for Mrs. Finch next door, she thought. But as she drew closer, she realized the man was on her porch, not Mrs. Finch's. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Willow found herself looking into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a well-worn Stetson. "Afternoon, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "You must be Miss O'Connor." Willow shifted her rifle to a more comfortable position, immediately wary of strangers. "I am, and you are, Xavier Zimmerman," he replied with a slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Your new neighbor," Willow blinked in surprise. "New neighbor." "Just bought the old Dawson place," he explained, gesturing toward the abandoned property that bordered hers to the east. "Sheriff Hodges said you might be able to tell me where I could find some help fixing it up." Before Willow could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Tom Mercer and his friends were riding past, and they slowed when they spotted her talking to the stranger. "Hey, mister," Mercer called out. "Better watch yourself around that one. She's liable to shoot your hat off if you look at her wrong." The other men laughed, and one of them added, "That's Tonopah's gun-toting spinster." Carries that rifle like most ladies carry a handbag. Willow felt her face burn with humiliation. It was one thing to endure their mockery alone, but in front of this handsome stranger who was now her neighbor, it was almost unbearable. Xavier Zimmerman turned slowly to face the riders, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the only sound was the desert wind whipping dust around their boots. Then Xavier spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. A woman who knows how to handle a rifle. He turned back to Willow, his gaze taking in the Winchester in her hands and the quiet dignity in her stance. A slow smile spread across his face as he looked back at the cowboys. That's the woman I'd marry. The silence that followed was profound. Willow stared at him, certain she'd misheard. The cowboys seemed equally stunned, their mocking grins frozen on their faces. Xavier turned back to her as if nothing extraordinary had happened. So about those workers, Miss O'Connor. Willow swallowed hard, finding her voice. Mr. Rodriguez and his sons do good work. Their place is just past the blacksmith's. Xavier nodded. Much obliged. He tipped his hat again and headed to his wagon. I expect I'll be seeing you around, neighbor. As he drove away, Willow stood rooted to the spot, the cowboys forgotten as they rode off muttering among themselves. She watched Xavier's wagon until it disappeared down the street, wondering what kind of man would say such a thing to complete strangers and whether he'd meant a single word of it. One thing was certain. Tonopah Junction had just gotten a lot more interesting. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Nevada day that made Willow grateful for the vast open spaces of the West. She rose early as always, dressed in her practical skirt and blouse, and braided her long auburn hair into a single plait down her back. After a quick breakfast, she headed out to tend to her small vegetable garden and the few chickens she kept. As she worked, she couldn't help glancing occasionally toward the Dawson place, Xavier Zimmerman's place now. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could hear the distant sounds of hammering. He'd evidently found the Rodriguez men to help with repairs. She was still puzzling over his unexpected defense of her the day before. In 5 years, no one in town had ever stood up for her choice to carry a rifle. Most men were either threatened by her skill or dismissed it as a peculiar female fancy that would eventually pass. None had ever suggested it was a quality worth admiring, let alone marrying for. He was just being kind, she muttered to herself as she gathered eggs from the henhouse. Or making fun of those fools in his own way. Still, she couldn't deny the little flutter in her stomach when she recalled those blue eyes looking at her with what had seemed like genuine admiration. Around midday, as Willow was hanging laundry to dry in the hot desert sun, she spotted a rider approaching from town. She shaded her eyes with one hand, recognizing Sheriff Hodges' sturdy frame atop his chestnut gelding. The lawman was a decent sort who'd been friends with her father, and one of the few people in town who didn't openly disapprove of her shooting practice. "Afternoon, Willow," he called as he rode into her yard. "Sheriff," she nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted with a grunt, his weathered face grave. "Got some troubling news. The Sadler gang's been spotted about 40 miles west of here." Willow's blood ran cold. The Sadler gang was notorious throughout Nevada and parts of California. 3 brothers and their assorted criminal associates who specialized in violent robberies. They'd hit 2 stagecoaches in the last month alone, leaving several dead. "You think they're headed this way?" she asked, unconsciously glancing toward the house where her rifle stood propped by the door. "Can't say for certain, but it's possible. They tend to target isolated homesteads between larger robberies. Just wanted to warn folks on the outskirts to be extra vigilant." He looked at her seriously. "Maybe you ought to stay in town for a spell with the widow Jenkins, perhaps?" Willow shook her head firmly. "This is my home, Sheriff. I'm not abandoning it because of some outlaws who might or might not come this way." The sheriff sighed, clearly having expected this response. "At least keep that rifle of yours loaded and handy." "Always do," she assured him. He nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I've already warned your new neighbor. Seems a capable sort, military man from what I gather." "Is he?" Willow tried to sound merely curious rather than intensely interested. Cavalry, served out in Arizona territory for a spell, good man to have around if trouble comes. The sheriff remounted his horse. You need anything, you fire 3 shots in the air, I'll have men listening. After he'd ridden away, Willow went inside and checked her ammunition supply. She had plenty of cartridges for the Winchester, and her father's old Colt revolver was still in good working order. She'd never had to use either weapon against a person, but she practiced regularly and knew she could hit what she aimed at. Still, the news of the Sadler gang lingered like a dark cloud over the otherwise bright day. By late afternoon, she found herself frequently scanning the horizon as she went about her chores, the rifle never far from reach. She was collecting the dry laundry when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race. Grabbing the rifle, she stepped behind the corner of the house, then relaxed when she saw it was Xavier Zimmerman riding toward her place on a handsome buckskin horse. He spotted her and raised a hand in greeting, a smile warming his features. As he drew closer, Willow noted how at ease he seemed in the saddle, moving as one with the horse in the way of men who'd spent most of their lives riding. "Miss O'Connor," he called, tipping his hat as he reined in his mount. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, lowering the rifle but not putting it aside entirely. "I see the sheriff spoke to you as well." Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun, and a small scar that ran along his jawline. He wasn't classically handsome, perhaps, but there was a strength and character in his face that she found herself drawn to. "He did," Xavier confirmed, leading his horse to the water trough Willow indicated. "Thought it might be neighborly to check if you needed anything from town. I'm heading in shortly." The gesture touched her. "That's very kind, but I'm well supplied." Xavier nodded, then glanced at the rifle in her hands. "That's a fine weapon. Winchester 73, isn't it?" Surprised by his casual acceptance of her armed state, Willow nodded. "It was my father's." "You handle it like you know how to use it," he observed, not a question but a statement of fact. "I do," she replied simply. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'd expect nothing less from what I saw yesterday. Those boys at the saloon say you're the best shot in the county." Willow raised an eyebrow. "Those same boys who were mocking me." Xavier chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that made her smile despite herself. "Seems their tune changes depending on who's asking, but Sheriff Hodges confirmed it, said you can hit a tin can at 100 paces 9 times out of 10. 8, Willow corrected modestly, on a good day. "Still better than most men I've known," Xavier said. He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said yesterday, about a woman who can handle a rifle." Willow felt a blush creeping up her neck. "You don't even know me, Mr. Zimmerman." "Xavier," he corrected gently. "And no, I don't." "Not yet, but I know that in this country, practical skills matter more than social conventions. And I know that a woman willing to face ridicule to maintain those skills has the kind of courage I admire." His words left her momentarily speechless. For years, she'd endured sideways glances and outright criticism for her determination to maintain the shooting skills her father had taught her. Not once had anyone framed it as courage. Before she could formulate a response, Xavier continued, "Would you be willing to show me this famous marksmanship of yours sometime? It's been a while since I've had a worthy shooting partner." The request was so unexpected, so counter to every interaction she'd had with men in Tonopah, that Willow laughed out loud. "You want me to shoot with you? Unless you're worried about being outmatched," he teased, his blue eyes twinkling. The challenge was too tempting to resist. "Tomorrow morning, Mr. Zimmerman, Xavier. 6 o'clock. There's a good spot behind my property with natural backstops. Don't be late and bring your own ammunition. I don't share mine with the competition." His grin widened. "Yes, madam, I'll be there." He tipped his hat again and mounted his horse. "And Miss O'Connor, keep that rifle close tonight, just in case." As she watched him ride toward town, Willow felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, anticipation that had nothing to do with worry or fear. Sleep proved elusive that night. Willow tossed and turned, her mind alternating between thoughts of the Sadler gang possibly lurking in the darkness and the upcoming shooting match with Xavier Zimmerman. She'd set out a clean blouse and her best skirt practical enough for shooting but nicer than her everyday wear, before catching herself and wondering why she was fussing over her appearance for a simple shooting contest. She rose before dawn, dressed quickly, and checked her rifle one last time before heading out to the yard to feed the chickens. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as the first pale streaks of daylight appeared on the horizon. At precisely 6 o'clock, Xavier rode up on his buckskin rifle scabbard attached to his saddle and a small sack that presumably contained ammunition. He wore a blue shirt that matched his eyes, and his dark hair was neatly combed beneath his hat. "Morning, Miss O'Connor," he called cheerfully. "Ready to show me what you can do, Willow," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "If we're to be shooting partners, you might as well call me Willow." His smile warmed his entire face. "Willow it is." She led him to the small clearing behind her property where she practiced her shooting. Someone, likely her father years ago, had carved rough notches into several large boulders at varying distances, creating perfect perches for tin cans and other targets. "Your father set this up?" Xavier asked, surveying the makeshift range with approval. Willow nodded, a familiar pang of loss sweeping through her. He believed a person should practice regularly to maintain any skill worth having. "Wise man," Xavier commented, unsheathing his rifle, a Springfield trapdoor model similar to those used by the cavalry. For the next hour, they took turns shooting at increasingly difficult targets. From simple tin cans to small rocks, Xavier balanced on distant outcroppings. Willow hit every target with remarkable precision, but so did Xavier, matching her shot for shot. "You weren't exaggerating about being good," he said appreciatively after she nailed a particularly difficult shot. "Neither were you," she replied, genuinely impressed by his marksmanship. "The cavalry taught you well." A shadow passed over his face briefly. "They taught me to shoot." "Experience taught me why it matters." Something in his tone made her hesitate to press further. Instead, she asked, "What brings you to Tonopah Junction? It's hardly the center of civilization." Xavier leaned against a boulder, his rifle balanced comfortably in the crook of his arm. "After 10 years in the cavalry, I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere with space to breathe." He gazed out at the vast Nevada landscape stretching to the mountains in the distance. "This feels right." And before the cavalry. Willow asked, curious about this man who seemed so at ease with both weapons and words. "Boston," he replied with a small smile. "My father was a professor at Harvard, expected me to follow in his footsteps." Willow blinked in surprise. "From Harvard to the cavalry to Nevada. That's quite a journey." "Life rarely follows the paths others set for us," he said simply. "What about you? Have you always lived here?" "Since I was 12, Willow answered, checking the chamber of her rifle before continuing. "My father was a mining engineer. We moved around a lot before settling here. After my mother died, it was just the two of us." She paused, memories washing over her. "When he passed 5 years ago, everyone expected me to sell the house and move back east to live with my aunt in Philadelphia, but this is home now." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And the rifle?" "Pa insisted I learn to shoot when I was 14, said a woman alone in the West needed to protect herself. After he died, I kept practicing. It connects me to him somehow." She hadn't intended to reveal so much, but something about Xavier made it easy to talk. "And the town disapproves," he stated rather than asked. Willow laughed without humor. "You saw how they are. A proper lady doesn't carry a rifle or outshoot the men." "A proper lady certainly doesn't live alone at the edge of town." She shrugged, trying to appear more nonchalant than she felt. "But proper ladies also don't survive out here without men to protect them, so I made my choice." Xavier's gaze was steady and warm. "Seems like the right choice to me." Before Willow could respond, the distant sound of multiple riders approaching from the west caught their attention. Xavier was instantly alert, moving to a position where he could see better while remaining partially concealed by the boulders. "5 riders," he said tersely. "Coming fast." Willow felt a chill of foreboding. "The Sadler gang, maybe, they're not taking the main road." Xavier checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Get back to your house. If it's them, we'll have better protection there." They hurried back, reaching Willow's front porch just as the riders came into clear view. Xavier positioned himself at the corner of the house, rifle at the ready, while Willow stood at the front window, her own Winchester loaded and cocked. As the riders drew closer, however, the tension eased slightly. It wasn't the Sadler gang but a group of cowboys from the Henderson ranch north of town, taking a shortcut across country. "Miss O'Connor," the lead rider called as they approached. "Sheriff sent us to check on you and the new fella." "Any trouble?" "None here, Jim," Willow called back, lowering her rifle but not setting it aside. Xavier stepped forward. "Any news of the Sadlers?" "Nothing solid," Jim replied, eyeing Xavier with curiosity. "Sheriff's got men watching all approaches to town. Thought it best to check the outlying places." The riders didn't stay long, just enough to confirm all was well before continuing their patrol. As the dust from their departure settled, Willow realized how tense she'd been, her shoulders aching from being held rigid. "Those men will be back in town by noon," she said, more to herself than to Xavier. "Telling everyone they found us together at sunrise?" he asked with a trace of amusement in his voice. Willow grimaced, the implications suddenly clear. In a small town like Tonopah, such gossip would spread faster than wildfire. "I didn't think, does it matter?" Xavier asked, his expression serious now. "What they think," the question caught her off guard. For 5 years, she'd maintained an uneasy truce with town opinion, ignoring it when she could, enduring it when she couldn't avoid it, but she'd never quite managed not to care at all. "Sometimes," she admitted honestly. "Not enough to change who I am or how I live, but enough to notice." Xavier nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He shouldered his rifle. "I should get back, check on the progress at my place. The Rodriguez boys were going to start on the roof today." As he mounted his horse, he hesitated, then said, "I'd like to do this again, Willow, the shooting practice." Despite her concerns about gossip, Willow found herself nodding. "I'd like that too. Tomorrow then, same time?" "I'll be here," she promised. As Xavier rode away, Willow couldn't help wondering what she was getting herself into. She'd spent 5 years cultivating independence and self-reliance, convincing herself she didn't need or want a man's company. Yet in less than 2 days, Xavier Zimmerman had slipped past defenses she hadn't even realized were there. The question now was whether that was something to welcome or to fear. True to Jim's prediction, by mid-afternoon the news had spread throughout Tonopah Junction that Willow O'Connor and the newcomer had been found together at dawn, both armed and apparently quite comfortable in each other's company. When Willow rode into town later that day to mail a letter and pick up supplies, the whispers followed her like persistent flies. "Heard she was showing him how to shoot," one woman murmured to another as Willow passed. "More likely showing him other things," came the snide reply, followed by poorly suppressed laughter. In the general store, Mrs. Abernathy made a point of asking loudly about that handsome Mr. Zimmerman, and whether he was adjusting well to country life after being so recently civilized. Willow answered politely but briefly, refusing to provide fodder for further gossip. She was selecting coffee beans when the bell above the door jingled and a hush fell over the store. Glancing up, she saw Xavier himself entering, hat in hand and looking somewhat bemused at the sudden silence. "Afternoon, ladies," he greeted the group of women who had been whispering just moments before. "Mr. Peterson," he added with a nod to the storekeeper. His gaze found Willow's across the room and a warm smile lit his face. "Miss O'Connor, good to see you again." The collective intake of breath from the onlookers was almost comical. Willow suppressed a smile of her own and nodded politely. "Mr. Zimmerman." Xavier made his way through the store, selecting items and engaging Mr. Peterson in conversation about local suppliers and the quality of Nevada timber versus that from California. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being watched, but unconcerned by it. As Willow paid for her purchases and prepared to leave, Xavier approached, his own arms full of supplies. "Allow me to walk you to your wagon, Miss O'Connor," he offered, loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a perfectly conventional courtesy, the kind offered to any lady in town. Yet coming from Xavier, directed at her, it seemed to take on additional significance in the eyes of the watching townsfolk. Outside, as they walked toward where Willow had left her small wagon, Xavier leaned closer and murmured, "I think we've given them enough to talk about for one day, don't you?" Willow couldn't help but laugh. "You did that deliberately, offered to walk you to your wagon. It's only good manners," he replied innocently, though his eyes twinkled with mischief. "You know what I mean," she said, still smiling, "making it clear you don't care what they think about our friendship." Xavier loaded her purchases into the wagon before responding. "I spent too many years caring what others thought my father, my commanding officer's society, out here." He gestured to the vast, open country surrounding them. "Out here, a person ought to be free to associate with whoever they please, especially someone as interesting as you." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Well, it seems you've made quite an impression already, Mrs. Abernathy was practically swooning over that handsome Mr. Zimmerman." Xavier grimaced comically. "Wonderful, just what I need a matchmaking campaign from Tanapa's finest matrons." "Better you than me," Willow said dryly. "They gave up on finding me a husband years ago, once they realized I wasn't planning to put the rifle away and become a proper lady." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, a seriousness that hadn't been there moments before. "Their loss," he said quietly. "Any man worth his salt would see what I see." Before Willow could ask what exactly that was, Sheriff Hodges approached on horseback, his expression grim. "Miss O'Connor, Mr. Zimmerman," he greeted them tersely. "Got word the Sadlers hit a homestead 20 miles north last night. Killed the man, took everything of value." The news landed like a stone between them, instantly washing away the lightness of their previous conversation. "How many in the gang now?" Xavier asked, his voice taking on the crisp tone of a military man. "At least 6, from what we can tell. The 3 Sadler brothers and a few rotating accomplices." The sheriff looked troubled. "They're moving south, which puts them heading right for us. I've telegraphed Carson City for assistance, but it'll be at least 3 days before they can get men here." Willow felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. "You think they'll hit Tanapa?" "Hard to say. They might bypass the town entirely, stick to isolated homesteads." The sheriff's gaze moved meaningfully between her and Xavier. "Which is why I'm asking again, would you consider staying in town until this is resolved?" Willow's jaw set stubbornly. "This is my home, Sheriff. I'm not abandoning it to thieves and murderers." Xavier nodded in agreement. "My place is nearly habitable now. I'm not leaving it undefended." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Figured as much from both of you. In that case, I'm organizing a patrol rotation. Men riding in pairs to check the outlying properties every few hours. Would help if you could both keep an eye out for anything suspicious and be ready to signal if there's trouble." "Of course," Willow agreed. "I'll help with the patrols too if you need another rider," Xavier offered. "Might take you up on that," the sheriff said, then hesitated before adding, "Miss O'Connor, no disrespect intended, but maybe it would be safer if you weren't alone at night until this situation is resolved." Willow bristled, knowing what was coming, another suggestion that she move in with someone in town, another implication that as a woman alone, she was inherently vulnerable, but Xavier spoke before she could. "My place is closest to Miss O'Connor's. I could keep watch from there, be within shouting distance if anything happens." It was a sensible suggestion, preserving her independence while acknowledging the real danger. Willow found herself nodding. "That seems reasonable." Relief crossed the sheriff's weathered features. "Good. I'll let you know the patrol schedule once it's organized." He tipped his hat and rode off toward the saloon, presumably to recruit more men for his patrols. When he was gone, Willow turned to Xavier. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Offer a practical solution that doesn't involve you being uprooted from your home." Xavier shrugged. "Seemed the obvious course of action." Willow studied him for a moment, trying to understand this man who continuously defied her expectations. "Most men would have insisted I needed protection, not just proximity." "Most men haven't seen you shoot," he replied simply, then added with a wry smile, "Besides, who says I'm not counting on you to protect me if the Sadlers come calling?" The joke broke the tension, and Willow found herself smiling again despite the ominous news. Just don't forget our shooting practice tomorrow morning. If we're going to face down outlaws together, we should at least be coordinated about it." "Wouldn't miss it," Xavier promised, helping her up onto the wagon seat. "Take the main road home even though it's longer, more visible, safer right now." Willow nodded her agreement and gathered the reins. As she drove away, she caught a glimpse of Xavier watching her departure, his expression thoughtful. For the first time in years, the prospect of danger didn't make her feel entirely alone. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected routine. Each morning at dawn, Xavier would ride over for shooting practice, which became increasingly elaborate as they devised more challenging targets and scenarios. They discovered they worked well as a team, intuitively understanding each other's strengths and adapting accordingly. After their practice, Xavier would often stay for coffee on Willow's porch, their conversations ranging from books they'd read to places they'd traveled, carefully skirting certain topics by unspoken agreement: her mother's death, his time in the cavalry, the precise reasons he'd left Boston for the West. In the afternoons, Xavier joined the town patrols, riding with different men to check the outlying properties and scout for signs of the Sadler gang. Evenings found him back at his own place, close enough that a shout or 3 gunshots would bring him running if Willow needed help. On the 4th morning, as they practiced shooting from horseback, a skill at which Xavier excelled and Willow was quickly improving, he mentioned a dinner invitation from the Hendersons, the wealthy ranchers north of town. "Apparently they invite all newcomers of a certain status," he explained, reloading his rifle. "Though I suspect Mrs. Henderson is mostly interested in parading her unmarried daughter before any eligible bachelor who wanders into the territory." Willow laughed, adjusting her position on her mare. "Sarah Henderson is perfectly nice, if a bit sheltered. Her mother has been trying to marry her off for 2 years now." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "And what about you? Were you never paraded before eligible bachelors?" "Me, hardly." Willow took aim at a distant tin can and fired, knocking it off its perch. "Mrs. Henderson made it clear long ago that my unusual habits made me an unsuitable companion for Sarah. As for marriage prospects," she shrugged. "Let's just say that before you arrived, Tanapa had decided I was a lost cause." "Their loss," Xavier said, echoing his words from days earlier. He hesitated, then added, "Come with me." Willow nearly dropped her rifle in surprise. "What?" "To the Hendersons' dinner." "Come with me," he repeated, more firmly this time. "The invitation included a guest, and I'd rather spend the evening with you than making awkward conversation with strangers while dodging matrimonial ambushes. Are you sure that's wise?" Willow asked, though a part of her was already considering which dress to wear. "It would certainly set tongues wagging even more than they already are." Xavier guided his buckskin closer to her mare. "Willow O'Connor, do I strike you as a man who cares overmuch about wagging tongues?" His proximity and the intensity in his blue eyes made her heart beat faster. "No," she admitted, "you don't." "Good, then it's settled." His smile was warm enough to chase away the morning chill. "I'll pick you up at 6 tomorrow evening. Wear something that compliments your eyes, though I imagine you'd look remarkable in anything." Before she could formulate a response to such an unexpected compliment, Xavier's attention shifted to something over her shoulder. His expression changed instantly, all warmth vanishing as he reached for his rifle. "Riders coming," he said quietly. "Get behind me." Willow turned to look. 3 men on horseback were approaching from the west, riding directly toward them across open country rather than following any established trail. They were still some distance away, but something about their purposeful approach raised the hair on the back of Willow's neck. "Could be the Sadlers," Xavier murmured, positioning his horse slightly in front of hers despite her earlier protest. "Be ready to ride hard for town if I say so." Willow checked her rifle, ensuring it was fully loaded. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." Xavier shot her a quick glance, looking as though he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "Then we stand together. But if shooting starts, you head for cover, understood?" The riders drew closer, and Willow could now make out details: 3 rough-looking men, unshaven and trail-worn, their clothes dusty from hard riding. The leader was a broad-shouldered man with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. Red Saddler, Xavier confirmed grimly. The oldest brother. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out slightly in a manner that immediately struck Willow as tactical, covering more ground, making themselves harder targets if shooting started. "Morning, folks," Red Saddler called when they were about 50 yards away, his tone falsely pleasant. "Hope we ain't interrupting nothing important. Just out for a morning ride," Xavier replied evenly. "Something we can help you with," Red grinned, revealing a gold tooth that glinted in the sunlight. "Maybe so. We're looking for Tonopah Junction, this the right direction." He gestured vaguely eastward. "Town's about 3 miles that way," Xavier said, pointing south rather than east. "Follow the main road once you hit it." It was a deliberate misdirection, Willow realized. The road Xavier indicated would take them miles out of their way before eventually circling back to Tonopah. Red Saddler's eyes narrowed slightly, suggesting he might suspect the deception. His gaze shifted to Willow, taking in the rifle in her hands and her capable posture on horseback. Something ugly flickered across his features. "That's mighty helpful of you," he said, his friendly tone now transparently false. "Ain't often you see a lady out riding with a rifle, unusual sight." "Not in these parts," Xavier replied before Willow could speak. "Every sensible person goes armed these days, too many undesirables on the roads." The implied insult wasn't lost on Saddler, whose smile tightened. "That right. Well, me and my brothers," he gestured to the 2 men flanking him, "we always make a point of being respectful to armed ladies." "Don't we, boys?" The younger Saddlers murmured agreement, their eyes cold and evaluating as they studied Xavier and Willow. "Good policy," Xavier said calmly, though Willow could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested close to his sidearm. "Now if you'll excuse us, we need to be getting back." Red Saddler nodded slowly. "Course, much obliged for the directions." His gaze lingered on Willow one last time, making her skin crawl. "Maybe we'll see you in town." "Safe travels," Xavier replied with finality, already turning his horse to position himself between Willow and the Saddlers as they began to ride away. They maintained a steady pace until the Saddlers were well out of sight, then Xavier abruptly increased their speed. "We need to warn the sheriff," he said tersely. "They're scouting the town, probably planning something." "They'll know you gave them false directions soon enough," Willow added, keeping pace with him. "That won't improve their mood." Xavier's expression was grim. "I'm more concerned about the way Red Saddler looked at you, like he was memorizing your face." The observation sent a chill through Willow despite the warming day. "You think they might target my place?" "I think we can't rule it out. Isolated homestead, woman living alone, it fits their pattern." He glanced at her. "I know you won't leave your home, but would you consider staying at my place tonight? It's more defensible and we'd be better able to watch each other's backs." The suggestion should have scandalized her. A proper lady simply didn't spend the night at a bachelor's home, no matter the circumstances. But Willow had long ago accepted that survival in the West often trumped social niceties. "Yes," she agreed. "That makes sense." If Xavier was surprised by her ready acquiescence, he didn't show it. "We'll stop at your place first so you can pack what you need, then head straight to the sheriff." The ride to town seemed interminable, both of them scanning the horizon constantly for signs of the Saddlers or their associates. When they finally reached the sheriff's office, they found Hodges already organizing men in response to other sightings of the gang. "They're definitely casing the town," the sheriff confirmed after hearing their report. "Been spotted by 3 different patrols today, always asking innocent questions about Tonopah and the surrounding properties." "What's your plan?" Xavier asked, his military background evident in his direct approach. "Got 10 armed men watching the approaches to town, and another 5 ready to respond to any reports of trouble. The telegraph operators sending updates every hour to Carson City." The sheriff looked tired but determined. "They promised troops by tomorrow morning if the gang's still in the area." "Meanwhile, Miss O'Connor will be staying at my place tonight," Xavier informed him. "Her property is too isolated to defend properly." If the sheriff was surprised by this arrangement, he hit it well. "Good thinking. I'd feel better knowing you 2 were watching out for each other." He hesitated, then added, "Should I send a man to ride patrol near your properties overnight?" Xavier shook his head. Better to keep your men concentrated where they can support each other. We can handle ourselves if trouble comes. The sheriff nodded, clearly relieved not to have to spread his limited forces any thinner. Be careful out there. These saddlers, they don't leave witnesses. As they left the sheriff's office, Willow was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them down the street. News traveled fast in Tanapa, and the sight of her with Xavier heading toward his wagon with a small bag of her belongings would fuel gossip for weeks to come. Second thoughts? Xavier asked quietly as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. Willow squared her shoulders. About my safety, no. About the talk this will generate, she smiled wryly. Too late to worry about that now. Xavier's answering smile held a hint of admiration. You're a remarkable woman, Willow O'Connor. As they drove out of town, Willow found herself more concerned about the coming confrontation with the Sadler gang than with Tanapa's opinion of her virtue. Somehow, in just a few short days, Xavier Zimmerman had made her care less about appearances and more about what truly mattered: survival, courage, and the unexpected bond forming between them. Night fell quickly in the Nevada desert, the temperature dropping sharply as darkness claimed the landscape. Xavier's house, still only partially repaired but structurally sound, stood silhouetted against the starlit sky as they approached. He'd positioned lanterns strategically, providing enough light to see by without creating obvious targets for anyone watching from a distance. It's not much, he apologized as he helped Willow down from the wagon, but the roof doesn't leak anymore and the fireplace draws properly. Inside, Willow found the main room sparsely but practically furnished with a solid table, several chairs, and a small bookshelf already filled with volumes that piqued her curiosity. A rifle rack on the wall held several weapons, all well maintained, and a gun belt was draped over the back of one chair. Military habits die hard, Xavier explained, noticing her glance at the orderly arrangement of his possessions. Everything in its place, ready when needed. It's comforting, actually, Willow admitted. My father was much the same way. Xavier built up the fire while Willow prepared a simple meal from the supplies they'd brought. They ate mostly in silence, both aware of the danger that might be lurking in the darkness outside, both listening for sounds that didn't belong to the normal Nevada night. After they'd cleared away the dishes, Xavier outlined his plan. We'll take watches through the night, 4 hours each. I'll take first watch until midnight, then wake you. Willow nodded agreement. I'll set out some extra ammunition by each window. If they come, they'll likely try to surround the house. Good thinking. Xavier checked his pocket watch. You should try to get some sleep now. Bedrooms through there. I changed the sheets this morning. Willow hesitated. Where will you sleep when it's your turn? Chair by the fire will do me fine, he assured her. I've slept in far worse conditions. A strange awkwardness fell between them, the first since they'd met. Despite the practical necessity of the arrangement, they were both suddenly, acutely aware of its impropriety. Xavier, Willow began, not entirely sure what she meant to say. I know, he said quietly, but tonight isn't about anything except keeping us both alive if the Sadlers come calling. Everything else, that's for another time. The simple statement acknowledged what had been growing between them while setting it carefully aside. Willow nodded, grateful for his understanding. Wake me at midnight, she reminded him, then on impulse, reached out and briefly squeezed his hand before retiring to the bedroom. Sleep came surprisingly easily despite the circumstances, a testament to the trust she already placed in Xavier. It seemed she'd barely closed her eyes when his gentle hand on her shoulder roused her. Everything quiet? She asked, immediately alert. So far, Xavier confirmed, but there's a storm building to the west, perfect cover for anyone wanting to approach unseen. Willow rose and splashed water on her face from the basin he'd provided, then checked her rifle before joining Xavier by the front window. Outside, the wind had picked up, and clouds were beginning to obscure the stars. In the distance, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the landscape. I'll keep watch from here in the south window, she said. Try to get some rest. Xavier nodded but made no move toward the bedroom. Think I'll stay out here a while longer, keep you company until the storm hits properly. They settled into comfortable silence, each scanning the darkness beyond the windows, alert for any movement that didn't match the sway of trees and bushes in the increasing wind. "Tell me about Boston," Willow said suddenly, wanting to hear his voice over the growing howl of the wind. Xavier glanced at her, surprised by the request, then smiled slightly. "What would you like to know? Why did you leave, really?" He was quiet for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "My father had my life planned out from the day I was born. Harvard, law. Politics eventually, a suitable marriage to a suitable young lady from a suitable family." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a kind of resigned acceptance. "I tried to be what he wanted, made it halfway through law school before I realized I was suffocating." "So you joined the cavalry," Willow prompted when he fell silent again. "An act of rebellion initially," he admitted. "But it became more than that. I found purpose there, a kind of clarity that comes with having clearly defined duties and responsibilities." His expression darkened. "Until I didn't," Willow waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "We were stationed near the Arizona-Mexico border, ordered to relocate a group of Apache families, women, children, old men mostly. Their fighters were away." Xavier's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "They weren't hostile. They just wanted to stay on their ancestral lands. My commanding officer didn't care about the orders, just wanted them gone by any means necessary." Willow's heart sank, understanding where this story was heading. The treatment of native peoples was a stain on the nation's conscience, one that many chose to ignore, but that couldn't be unseen once witnessed. "What happened?" she asked softly. "I refused to participate, threatened to report him if he proceeded." Xavier's jaw tightened. "He had me arrested for insubordination, carried out the relocation anyway. 23 people died on the forced march, mostly children and elderly who couldn't keep up." "I'm so sorry," Willow whispered, understanding now why he'd left the military, why he'd sought the isolation of Tanapa. Xavier met her gaze, something vulnerable in his eyes. "I couldn't stay after that, couldn't be part of a system that would allow such things." Before Willow could respond, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard outside, and in that brief, stark moment of brightness, she caught a glimpse of movement near the edge of the property. "Xavier," she said quietly, all thoughts of Boston and the cavalry instantly forgotten, "by the big juniper." "I saw something." He was beside her in an instant, peering out into the darkness. How many, couldn't tell, just movement. They waited in tense silence for the next lightning flash. When it came, it revealed two figures crouching behind the woodpile, another moving toward the back of the house. "At least 3, Xavier murmured. "Probably more we can't see." "The Saddlers," Willow whispered, her rifle already positioned. "Has to be. No one else would be sneaking around in a storm." Xavier's voice was calm, focused. "When the shooting starts, stay low and shoot for the muzzle flashes." He moved quickly to extinguish the lanterns, plunging the house into darkness except for the dim glow from the fireplace. "They'll think we're asleep, try to get closer," he explained, taking position at another window. The storm was directly overhead now, thunder crashing so loudly that Willow could feel it in her chest. Rain began to fall, softly at first, then in a sudden downpour that drummed on the roof and reduced visibility to almost nothing. They waited, every sense straining for signs of approach. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, and Willow saw a figure darting from the woodpile toward the front porch. "Front," she called, taking aim. Before she could fire, a shot rang out from outside, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from her head. Xavier returned fire immediately, his shot answered by a cry of pain from the darkness. "Got one," he said grimly, "but there are more." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, at least 4 shooters, Willow estimated. She fired methodically at the muzzle flashes, just as Xavier had instructed, gratified to hear another shout of pain after her third shot. A bullet thudded into the wall behind her, showering her with splinters. Xavier was firing steadily from his position, his military training evident in his disciplined response to the ambush. "They're trying to flank us," he called over the gunfire and thunder. "Watch the back door." Willow moved to cover the rear of the house, arriving just as someone tried to force the door. She fired through the wood, heard a curse, then the sound of retreating footsteps. For several minutes, the exchange of gunfire continued, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Then, during a brief lull, a voice called out from the darkness. "You in there? Zimmerman, send out the woman and we'll let you live." Xavier's response was a shot in the direction of the voice, followed by his own shouted reply. "Come and get her if you want her so badly, Sadler." The answer was a renewed volley of gunfire, more intense than before. A bullet grazed Willow's arm, tearing her sleeve and leaving a burning line across her skin. She hissed in pain but kept firing, determined not to show weakness. "You hit?" Xavier asked sharply, noticing her reaction. "Just a graze," she assured him, reloading quickly. "I'm fine." The attack continued for what seemed like hours but was likely only 20 minutes. Gradually, the gunfire from outside became more sporadic, suggesting that Willow and Xavier's determined defense was taking its toll on the attackers. Finally, after a prolonged silence broken only by the storm, they heard the sound of horses galloping away. "They're retreating," Xavier said, his voice tight with controlled tension. "But they might circle back once they've regrouped." Willow nodded, keeping her rifle trained on the window. "How many do you think we hit?" "At least 2, maybe 3. Xavier moved cautiously to check the other windows. The storm worked in our favor, hard to aim accurately in this weather. When no further attacks came for over an hour, they allowed themselves to relax slightly. Xavier insisted on examining Willow's arm, his touch gentle as he cleaned and bandaged the graze. "It could have been much worse," he said quietly, his fingers lingering on her skin longer than strictly necessary. "If you hadn't spotted them when you did." Willow met his gaze, suddenly acutely aware of their proximity, of the shared danger they'd just faced. "We make a good team," she said softly. Something shifted in Xavier's eyes, a decision being made. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Willow answered by curling her fingers into the fabric of his shirt, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and walls built around her heart melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you with that rifle," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Willow smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the danger still lurking outside. "I'm glad you finally got around to it." A loud crack of thunder reminded them that the night wasn't over, nor was the threat. Reluctantly, they returned to their positions by the windows, watching for any sign of the Sadler's return. But the outlaws didn't reappear. As dawn approached and the storm finally moved on, leaving a damp, misty landscape in its wake, they cautiously ventured outside to assess the situation. Blood trails confirmed Xavier's estimate they had hit at least 3 of their attackers. Boot prints in the mud suggested a total of 6 men had participated in the assault. "They'll be desperate now," Xavier said grimly as they followed the tracks to where the gang had tied their horses during the attack. "Wounded, angry, and still in the area. We should get to town, warn the sheriff," Willow suggested, scanning the horizon warily. Xavier nodded. "They won't try anything in broad daylight with the whole town on alert, but tonight they might hit someone else," Willow finished his thought. "Someone less prepared." They rode into Tanapa as fast as their horses could manage, the morning sun barely clearing the eastern mountains. The town was already stirring, shopkeepers opening their doors, the blacksmith's hammer ringing in the clear morning air. News of their night-long battle with the Sadler gang spread quickly. Sheriff Hodges organized additional patrols, and by noon, word arrived via telegraph that a detachment of soldiers was less than 2 hours away. "With the military here, the Sadlers will move on," the sheriff assured them as they sat in his office, both exhausted but too keyed up to rest. "They're not fools enough to take on the U.S. cavalry." Xavier looked less convinced. "They've got wounded men, which makes them desperate, and Red Sadler didn't strike me as the type to retreat without some kind of revenge." "Which is why you're both staying in town tonight," the sheriff said firmly. "Mrs. Jenkins has rooms ready for you." To Willow's surprise, Xavier didn't argue. "That's sensible," he agreed. "But tomorrow, assuming the Sadlers have moved on, we'll be attending the Hendersons' dinner as planned." The sheriff raised his eyebrows, looking between them with new understanding. Is that so? Well, I suppose after facing down the Sadler gang together, a social gathering should be easy enough. Willow felt her cheeks warm, but didn't contradict Xavier's implication that they would be attending as a couple. After last night, the danger, the kiss, the unspoken promise of something more, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. The soldiers arrived precisely when expected, their blue uniforms and disciplined bearing a reassuring sight as they rode into Tonopah. Their commander, a Captain Reynolds, conferred with Sheriff Hodges and then deployed his men strategically around the town and its approaches. "We'll remain in the area for at least 3 days," the captain informed the gathered townspeople, "or until we're certain the Sadler gang has moved well away from this vicinity." With the immediate danger seemingly contained, Willow finally allowed herself to rest. Mrs. Jenkins, a kind widow who ran the town's only boarding house, fussed over her arm and insisted on changing the bandage Xavier had applied. "Fighting off outlaws with Mr. Zimmerman," the older woman clucked, though there was more admiration than censure in her tone. "I always said you had more spine than half the men in this town, Willow O'Connor." Willow smiled tiredly. "It wasn't a choice I'd have made voluntarily, Mrs. Jenkins." "Maybe not," the widow conceded, securing the fresh bandage, "but when trouble came, you stood your ground." "That's more than some can say." She patted Willow's good arm. "And that young man of yours, he's a keeper, if you don't mind my saying so, the way he looks at you." "He's not my," Willow began automatically, then stopped. After everything they'd shared, could she really claim Xavier wasn't hers in some significant way? "It's all very new," she amended. Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "New or not, I haven't seen you look so alive in the 5 years I've known you. That counts for something in my book." Willow slept deeply that afternoon, her dreams occasionally disturbed by echoes of gunfire but soothed by memories of Xavier's arms around her, his lips on hers. When she woke, the sun was low in the western sky, casting long shadows across her room. A knock at her door revealed Mrs. Jenkins with a covered tray. "Brought you some supper, dear, and Mr. Zimmerman asked me to tell you he'll be up to check on you shortly. Been helping the soldiers set up their watch posts all afternoon, he has." Willow ate hungrily, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal since before the attack. She was just finishing when another knock came, this one with a particular cadence she already recognized as Xavier's. "Come in," she called, smoothing her hair self-consciously. Xavier entered, looking as tired as she felt but smiling warmly when he saw her. "You look better," he observed, taking the chair Mrs. Jenkins had placed beside the bed. "How's the arm?" "Barely hurts," Willow assured him. "More of a nuisance than anything. Any news of the Sadlers?" Cavalry found their trail heading west away from Tonopah. 3 separate blood trails, just as we thought. Xavier's expression hardened. They also found a homestead that had been raided about 10 miles from here. Family was away visiting relatives, thankfully, but the place was ransacked. They were gathering supplies for their wounded, Willow deduced. "Do you think they're really gone?" Xavier considered the question seriously. "With the cavalry here, probably. Red Sadler is many things, but he's not foolish enough to take on trained soldiers." He paused. "Which means our dinner engagement tomorrow should be safe enough." Despite everything, Willow found herself smiling at the reminder. "It seems trivial after what we've been through." "On the contrary," Xavier replied, taking her hand in his. "After what we've been through, celebrating life with good food and better company seems exactly right." His touch sent a pleasant warmth through her that had nothing to do with her injury or the room's temperature. "I suppose I'll need to find something suitable to wear," she mused. "Something that complements my eyes, I believe, was the suggestion." Xavier's smile deepened. "I stand by that recommendation." He hesitated, then added more seriously, "Willow, about last night, the kiss." "Yes," she prompted when he didn't immediately continue. "I don't want you to think it was just the heat of the moment, the danger making us act impulsively." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your determination, your skill with that rifle," this with a small smile. "Everything about you fascinates me." Willow squeezed his hand, her heart suddenly too full for casual words. I've spent 5 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone, that independence was enough. Then you showed up and said that ridiculous thing about marrying a woman who could handle a rifle. Not ridiculous at all, Xavier corrected gently. Completely sincere. That's what frightens me, Willow admitted. I'm not used to someone seeing me really seeing me and not wanting to change everything about me. Xavier brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I wouldn't change a single thing about you, Willow O'Connor, not one. The simple declaration, spoken so earnestly, melted something inside her that had been frozen for a very long time. In that case, she said softly, I believe I'm looking forward to dinner with the Hendersons tomorrow, particularly the company I'll be keeping. Xavier's smile was all the answer she needed. The Henderson Ranch lay 5 miles north of Tonopah Junction, a sprawling property that represented one of the territory's success stories. John Henderson had arrived 20 years earlier with nothing but determination and a small herd of cattle. Now his ranch encompassed thousands of acres and employed dozens of men. As Xavier drove the rented buggy up the long approach to the main house, Willow found herself uncharacteristically nervous. She'd chosen her best dress for the occasion, a deep green silk that did indeed complement her eyes, with lace trim at the bodice and sleeves that cleverly concealed her bandaged arm. You look beautiful, Xavier told her, his admiration evident in his gaze. He himself cut a fine figure in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. Though I must admit, I'm almost as fond of you in riding clothes with that rifle of yours. Willow laughed, her nerves easing slightly. A highly unconventional preference, Mr. Zimmerman. I've never claimed to be conventional, Miss O'Connor. He guided the horses expertly up the drive. Besides, after our adventures with the Sadler gang, I suspect we'll be the main topic of conversation regardless of what you're wearing. He was right, of course. The moment they entered the Hendersons' impressive home, they were surrounded by curious guests eager to hear first-hand accounts of their confrontation with the notorious outlaws. Is it true you shot 2 of them yourself, Miss O'Connor? Asked the banker's wife, her expression a mixture of horror and fascination. We both defended ourselves as necessary, Mrs. Thornton, Willow replied diplomatically. It was hardly the evening we had planned. Xavier remained close to her side throughout the pre-dinner mingling, his hand occasionally resting lightly at the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The touch should have bothered her. Willow had spent years building her independence. After all, but instead, she found it reassuring. A silent reminder that she wasn't facing the curious crowd alone, Mrs. Henderson, a formidable woman known for her social ambitions, watched them with poorly concealed disappointment. It was clear she had hoped to interest Xavier in her daughter Sarah, a pretty, docile girl of 19 who blushed every time Xavier so much as glanced in her direction. Such a terrible business with those outlaws, Mrs. Henderson said when she finally managed to separate Willow from Xavier momentarily, steering her toward the refreshment table. You must have been terrified, alone with Mr. Zimmerman in such circumstances. The implication was clear. Proper young ladies did not spend nights alone with bachelor gentlemen, regardless of the extenuating circumstances. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, I was grateful for Mr. Zimmerman's presence, Willow replied evenly, as he was undoubtedly grateful for my marksmanship. We make an excellent team, Mrs. Henderson's lips thinned disapprovingly. Yes, well, it's fortunate your reputation survived the incident, although I'm sure there will be talk. Willow was spared from responding by Xavier's timely return to her side. I hope you're not monopolizing Miss O'Connor, Mrs. Henderson, he said smoothly. I was just telling your husband about her remarkable shooting skills. He's quite impressed. The mention of her husband's approval somewhat mollified Mrs. Henderson, who reluctantly moved away to attend to other guests. Rescue appreciated, Willow murmured. Xavier's eyes twinkled. I thought you might need reinforcements. Mrs. Henderson seems determined to disapprove of our partnership. The word held a wealth of possibilities that made Willow's pulse quicken. Partnership, she repeated thoughtfully. I like the sound of that. Dinner was a grand affair. with more courses than Willow typically ate in an entire day and conversation that ranged from local concerns to national politics. She found herself seated beside Xavier at the long table, with Sarah Henderson directly across from them, casting frequent wistful glances in Xavier's direction. "Sarah is quite accomplished on the pianoforte," Mrs. Henderson announced as dessert was served. "Perhaps she'll favor us with a performance after dinner." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion arose from the direction of the kitchen. One of the ranch hands burst into the dining room, his expression urgent. "Mr. Henderson, riders approaching fast from the west." "At least 6 of them, and they ain't looking friendly." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly from genteel socializing to tense alarm. "The Sadlers," Xavier said grimly, already on his feet. "They must have circled back after the cavalry moved west." John Henderson, a practical man despite his wealth, immediately took charge. "Ladies to the cellar," he ordered. "Men who are armed, prepare to defend the house. Timothy, ring the alarm bell, bring in any hands who are within earshot." As the women began to rise, gathering their skirts and moving toward the cellar stairs, Willow remained seated, her gaze locked with Xavier's. "I'm not going to the cellar," she stated calmly. Mrs. Henderson gasped in horror. "Miss O'Connor, this is hardly the time for your unconventional attitudes. The men will handle this situation." "With respect, Mrs. Henderson, I'm probably a better shot than half the men here," Willow replied, rising smoothly. "And the Sadlers have a particular grudge against me and Mr. Zimmerman. I won't hide while others face danger on my behalf." Xavier nodded his approval. "We need every skilled shooter, Henderson, and Miss O'Connor is exceptional." John Henderson hesitated only briefly before nodding. "There's a gun cabinet in my study. Help yourself, Miss O'Connor," ignoring Mrs. Henderson's continued protests. Willow followed Xavier and several of the male guests to the study, where Henderson unlocked an impressive cabinet containing various firearms. She selected a Winchester similar to her own and checked it efficiently. "Just like old times," Xavier murmured beside her, a rueful smile on his face. "Let's hope for a better outcome this time," Willow replied, thinking of the wounded arm that still throbbed occasionally beneath her fine dress. They took positions at the windows. The elegant dinner party transformed into a defensive stronghold in a matter of minutes. Outside, they could hear the approaching riders, no longer bothering to conceal their approach. "They're desperate," Xavier observed. "Wounded on the run from the cavalry and now making a direct assault on a well-defended ranch house. Red Sadler must be losing his grip." A ranch hand who had been posted as lookout came running up to the main house. "It's them all right, the Sadler gang, Red's in front looking mad as a hornet. Got his brothers with him and 3 others." John Henderson frowned. "Only 6, they must know we have more men than that." "Unless this is just a diversion," Xavier said suddenly. "Willow, where are the soldiers currently stationed?" Understanding dawned immediately. "In and around Tonopah," she realized, "with patrols to the west where they thought the Sadlers were headed. Leaving the eastern approaches relatively undefended," Xavier concluded. "This could be a feint to draw attention while the rest of their gang hits the town." Henderson immediately dispatched a rider to warn Tonopah, but the immediate threat remained 6 desperate outlaws advancing on the ranch house, with women and children to protect. The Sadlers stopped about 100 yards from the house, just within shouting distance but beyond accurate pistol range. "Zimmerman." Red Sadler's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "We know you're in there, you and that woman. Send them out and the rest of you can live." John Henderson stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground, a negotiating stance rather than an immediately hostile one. "This is Henderson land, Sadler. You and your men need to ride out now before more people get hurt." Red Sadler's laugh was ugly. "The only ones getting hurt tonight are the 2 who shot my brothers, 3 dead because of them." Willow and Xavier exchanged surprised glances. They had wounded 3 of the gang but hadn't realized any had died. "Your brothers died because you attacked innocent people," Henderson called back. "That's on you, not them." Red's response was a shot fired over Henderson's head, sending the rancher diving back into the doorway for cover. "So much for negotiations," Xavier muttered. They'll spread out, try to approach from multiple sides. As if confirming his prediction, the saddlers separated, 3 heading right, 3 left, all spurring their horses to move fast and present difficult targets. Wait until they're in range, Henderson instructed the defenders. Make your shots count. Willow focused on the riders approaching from the left, where she and Xavier had taken position. She steadied her breathing, sighted along the rifle barrel, and waited until the lead rider was within effective range. Her first shot caught the man in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. Xavier's shot followed immediately, downing another. The third rider veered off, seeking cover behind an outbuilding. On the right side of the house, Henderson and his men had similarly reduced the attackers' numbers, leaving only Red Saddler and 1 companion still mounted and returning fire. They'll regroup, Xavier predicted, reloading swiftly. Try again with a different approach. He was right. The saddlers, who could still move, retreated to a safe distance, gathering behind a rise in the land where they could confer without being visible to the defenders. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then a flaming arrow arced through the darkening sky, landing on the roof of a nearby barn. "They're trying to burn us out," Henderson said grimly. "Men to the barn. Don't let that fire spread." Several ranch hands raced toward the barn to extinguish the blaze before it could take hold. The moment they left the shelter of the main house, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The saddlers had used the lull to encircle the property and establish firing positions. 1 ranch hand fell immediately, clutching his leg. The others dove for cover, trapped between the house and the burning barn. "Cover me," Xavier said tersely to Willow. Then, before she could protest, he was running in a crouch toward the wounded man. Willow didn't hesitate. She laid down a steady stream of suppressing fire in the direction the shot had come from, forcing the hidden shooter to keep his head down while Xavier dragged the injured ranch hand to safety. More flaming arrows followed the first, some landing on the main house roof. Henderson organized a bucket brigade, with the women who had refused to remain in the cellar. Once the shooting started, passing water to the men who climbed onto the roof to douse the flames. Through it all, Willow maintained her position, firing with controlled precision whenever a target presented itself. Xavier rejoined her after ensuring the wounded man was being tended to, his expression grim but determined. "We can't let this drag on," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They'll keep trying to burn us out, and eventually they might succeed." "What do you suggest?" Willow asked, reloading her rifle with practiced efficiency. Xavier pointed to a rocky outcropping about 200 yards from the house. "I spotted movement there earlier. I think that's where Red is directing the attack from. If we can take him out, the others might lose heart." "That's a long shot," Willow observed, eyeing the distance critically. "For most people, yes," Xavier agreed, giving her a significant look. "But you're not most people, Willow O'Connor." She understood his meaning immediately. "You want me to try for Red? If anyone can make that shot, it's you." Willow considered the challenge. It would be the longest shot she'd ever attempted under combat conditions, with fading light and the pressure of knowing lives depended on her accuracy. "I'll need a stable position and a few moments without being shot at," she said finally. Xavier nodded. "I can arrange a diversion. Henderson has a group ready to make a sortie from the east side of the house. That should draw their attention long enough for you to take your shot." The plan was quickly communicated to Henderson, who approved it without hesitation. Within minutes, 6 armed men were prepared to create a diversion, while Willow positioned herself at an upstairs window that provided the clearest line of sight to the outcropping where Red Saddler was believed to be hiding. "Be careful," Xavier told her softly before joining the diversion party. "I'm rather looking forward to more dinners with you, preferably without gunfire interrupting dessert." Willow smiled despite the tension. "I'll hold you to that, Xavier Zimmerman." As the diversion group burst from the east side of the house, firing and shouting to draw attention, Willow settled into position at the window. She rested the rifle on a folded blanket to stabilize it, took a deep breath, and peered through the gathering dusk toward the outcropping. For several long seconds, she saw nothing. Then a movement caught her eye, a figure shifting position to better observe the diversion taking place. A shaft of fading sunlight glinted off something metallic, a gun barrel, or perhaps the gold-toothed red saddler was known for. Willow exhaled slowly, centered her sight picture, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space of the room. Through the drifting smoke, Willow strained to see the result of her shot. For a moment, nothing seemed to have changed. Then she saw a figure stumbling from behind the rocks, clutching at his chest before collapsing in plain view. From various points around the property, confused shouts arose from the remaining Sadler gang members. Without Red's direction, their coordinated attack quickly fell apart. Two threw down their weapons and surrendered. Another tried to flee on horseback but was quickly brought down by Henderson's men. By the time full darkness had fallen, the battle was over. The surviving Sadlers were secured in a reinforced storeroom to await the return of the cavalry, and the wounded on both sides were being tended to. Willow found Xavier on the porch, his shirt torn and a small cut on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. "That was one hell of a shot," he said admiringly. "Henderson's men found Red right where you dropped him, clean shot through the heart." Willow should have felt something regret, perhaps, or at least solemnity at having taken a life, but all she could summon was relief that the threat was over, that Xavier and the others were safe. "It was a necessary shot," she said simply. Xavier reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped during the chaos. "You saved a lot of lives tonight, Willow, from inside the house, Mrs." Henderson's voice could be heard organizing the cleanup efforts, her tone suggesting that having one's dinner party interrupted by outlaws was a mere inconvenience rather than a life-threatening situation. "I suppose we should help with the cleanup," Willow said reluctantly, not yet ready to rejoin the others and their inevitable questions. Xavier shook his head, taking her hand in his. "I think we've done our part for the evening." He glanced up at the star-filled sky, now peaceful as if the violence had never happened. "Walk with me." They strolled away from the house, toward a small garden that had somehow escaped damage in the battle. The scent of roses mingled with the lingering smell of gunpowder, an incongruous combination that nonetheless seemed to fit the evening perfectly. "I've been thinking," Xavier said after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes. "A dangerous pastime," Willow teased gently. He smiled, squeezing her hand. "Perhaps, especially when I'm thinking about a future I hadn't planned for." Willow's heart began to beat faster. "What kind of future?" Xavier stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious but warm. "When I bought the Dawson place, I was thinking only of solitude, of a quiet life away from the complications of my past. I didn't expect to find someone who would make me want more than that." "And have you?" Willow asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Found someone who makes you want more?" "I think you know the answer to that." Xavier's blue eyes held her steadily. "From the moment I saw you standing there with that rifle, so proudly defying everyone's expectations, you fascinated me, Willow O'Connor. And now, after everything we've been through together, I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that glinted in the moonlight, a ring, simple but elegant, with a single diamond catching the starlight. "I've been carrying this since yesterday," he admitted. "Bought it in town while you were resting at Mrs. Jenkins', probably too soon by conventional standards, but we've never been particularly conventional," Willow finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. Xavier smiled, hope and vulnerability mingled in his expression. "No, we haven't." He took a deep breath. "Willow O'Connor, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection or because I want to change you, but because I love exactly who you are, rifle and all, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes, surprising her. She wasn't a woman who cried easily, but the simple honesty of his proposal touched something deep within her. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Yes, Xavier Zimmerman, I will marry you. Because you've never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am, and because I love you for it." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. then drew her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a future neither of them had anticipated when he'd first ridden into Tonopah Junction just days before. When they finally returned to the Henderson house, hand in hand and with Willow's ring catching the light, they were met with a mixture of reactions. Mrs. Henderson looked scandalized at such a hasty engagement. Her husband offered hearty congratulations and immediately called for champagne. Sarah Henderson appeared momentarily disappointed, but quickly recovered to wish them well with seemingly genuine goodwill. By midnight, with the wounded tended to and the Sadler threat neutralized, Xavier drove Willow back to town in the rented buggy, both of them quiet but content in the aftermath of the day's events. Mrs. Jenkins will have opinions about your staying at my place tonight, Xavier observed as they approached Tonopah. Even with your new status as my fiancé, Willow smiled in the darkness. Let her have her opinions. After facing down the Sadler gang twice in 1 week, I find I'm less concerned with what people think than I used to be. A dangerous attitude for a future professor's daughter-in-law, Xavier teased, referring to his Boston background. Your father will be horrified by me, won't he? Willow realized suddenly. A gun-toting frontier woman with no formal education or social graces. Xavier laughed, the sound warm and reassuring in the night. My father's approval stopped mattering to me years ago. But for what it's worth, I think he'll be impressed by you once the initial shock wears off. He's always respected intelligence and determination, even when it appears in unexpected packages. As they reached Tonopah, they found the town still awake despite the late hour, lights burning in many windows as news of the battle at the Henderson ranch spread. Sheriff Hodges met them in front of Mrs. Jenkins' boarding house, relief evident on his weathered face. Heard you two were instrumental in taking down Red Sadler, he said, shaking Xavier's hand and nodding respectfully to Willow. The cavalry's on their way back, should be here by morning to collect the prisoners from the Henderson place. And the town, no trouble here? Xavier asked. All quiet, the sheriff confirmed. Your theory about the diversion was wrong, thankfully. Seems the Sadlers put everything they had into that one desperate attack. After assuring the sheriff they would provide formal statements in the morning, Xavier escorted Willow to the boarding house door. Mrs. Jenkins, predictably, was waiting up for them, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Heard there was quite a ruckus out at the Hendersons, she said by way of greeting. And now here you are, returning at all hours like, her words cut off abruptly as she noticed the ring on Willow's finger gleaming in the lamplight. Well, I never. Is that what I think it is, Willow O'Connor? Willow couldn't help but smile at the older woman's astonishment. It is, Mrs. Jenkins. Mr. Zimmerman has asked me to be his wife, and I've accepted. Mrs. Jenkins' expression transformed from shock to delight. Well, it's about time someone in this town recognized what a treasure you are. Congratulations to you both. She enveloped Willow in a motherly hug, then surprised Xavier by doing the same to him. Now, I suppose you'll be wanting your own room tonight, Mr. Zimmerman, propriety being what it is, engagement or no. Xavier accepted this pronouncement with good grace. Of course, Mrs. Jenkins. I wouldn't dream of scandalizing your establishment. But as Mrs. Jenkins bustled away to prepare his room, he drew Willow into a quiet corner of the entrance hall for a private good night. Not exactly how I planned to end our evening, he murmured, his hands gentle on her waist. But perhaps it's for the best. I'd like our wedding night to be somewhere more comfortable than a half-renovated house with bullet holes in the walls. Willow blushed at his directness but didn't pull away. When shall we be married? I don't need anything elaborate. The sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned, Xavier replied. Though I'd like to send for my younger sister in San Francisco. She's the only family member I'm still close to, and she'd never forgive me for marrying without her present. Of course, Willow agreed readily. I'd like to meet her, and it will take some time to repair the damage to your house. Our house, I suppose it will be. Xavier smiled at her correction. Our house, I like the sound of that. He kissed her once more, a gentle promise of all that was to come. Good night, my marksman. Good night, my defender, she replied softly. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the yard of the Zimmerman home, a much expanded and improved version of the original Dawson place. 4-year-old James was chasing his 2-year-old sister Eliza around the large oak tree Xavier had planted the year after their wedding, while their mother watched from the porch, a rifle balanced comfortably across her lap as she cleaned it. "Mama, Mama, Papa's coming." James called excitedly, pointing down the road where a rider was indeed approaching. Willow smiled, setting aside the rifle and rising to greet her husband. Xavier had been in Carson City for 3 days, meeting with territorial officials about the school he was helping to establish in Tonopah. The town had grown considerably in 5 years, with new businesses and families arriving regularly, drawn by the stability and opportunities the area now offered. Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, sweeping little Eliza up into his arms as she toddled toward him, then accepting James's exuberant welcome with a laugh. Finally, he turned to Willow, his blue eyes still holding the same warmth and admiration they had the first time he'd seen her with her rifle. "Welcome home," she said, stepping into his embrace with the ease of long practice. "Good to be home," he replied, kissing her soundly despite their audience. "Carson City's too crowded for my taste, too many politicians, and how is our school coming along?" Willow asked, leading the way inside where supper was waiting, kept warm in the oven she'd insisted on when they renovated the kitchen. "Funding approved," Xavier announced triumphantly. "Construction begins next month. And they've accepted all of our curriculum recommendations, including," he paused for dramatic effect, "mandatory shooting lessons for all students, boys and girls alike." Willow's eyes widened in surprise. "They agreed to that." "Even the school board members who thought I was setting a terrible example for young ladies," Xavier grinned. "Especially them. Seems your reputation as the woman who shot Red Sadler has only grown with time. The fact that 3 families in the past year alone have been able to defend their homes from bandits because their daughters knew how to handle a rifle has changed a few minds." Willow shook her head in wonder. 5 years ago, they mocked me for carrying a rifle. Now they want me to teach their daughters to shoot. Times change, Xavier observed, helping James into his chair at the dinner table. People change too when shown a better way. After the children were tucked into bed that night, Xavier and Willow sat on their porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him in the easy intimacy they'd built over their years together. "I had a letter from my father," Xavier mentioned, his tone casual but with an undercurrent Willow recognized immediately. His relationship with the elder Zimmerman remained complicated, though it had improved somewhat after James's birth. "Oh. What does the esteemed professor have to say this time?" she asked, keeping her own tone light. Xavier chuckled. "He's finally accepted my invitation to visit, says he wants to meet his grandchildren before they're grown." Willow sat up straighter, surprised, after all this time. What changed his mind? Apparently, one of his colleagues returned from a trip out west raving about meeting the famous Mrs. Zimmerman of Tonopah Junction, the sharpshooting schoolmistress who's revolutionizing education in the territories. Xavier's eyes danced with amusement. "It seems your reputation has reached even the hallowed halls of Harvard." "Heaven help us," Willow laughed. "Now I'll have to live up to it when he arrives." "You already exceed it every day," Xavier said softly, his expression growing serious. "Do you ever regret it?" "Marrying me, having the children, taking on the school, it's a different life than the independent one you had carved out for yourself." Willow considered the question, though she already knew her answer. "Independence is valuable," she said slowly, "but there are different kinds of freedom. Before you, I was free from entanglements, yes, but I was also alone. Now I'm free to be exactly who I am, with someone who cherishes that person rather than trying to change her." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Besides, what could be more independent than a woman who still carries her rifle, teaches half the town to shoot, runs a school according to her own principles, and has a husband who admires her for all of it?" Xavier's smile was tender as he leaned in to kiss her. When I said you were the woman I'd marry that first day in town, I had no idea how fortunate I would actually be, he murmured against her lips. We're both fortunate, Willow replied. It just took a man with the sense to appreciate a woman with a rifle, and a woman willing to risk her heart on a man who saw her true value. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the Nevada sky, a fitting tribute, they both thought but didn't say aloud, to a love born amidst gunfire and danger, now flourishing in the peace they had helped create.